Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, sir. Sir, after 1 or 2 minutes, we'll start the session, sir. Can you hear me easily, sir?
Yes, I can hear you.
Are there any problems with my video, sir?
No.
Thank you, sir.
No problem at all. Can you hear me all right?
Affirmative, sir. We can see you and we can hear you easily, sir. Although there is a slight time delay. Dr. Sami, sir, there is a request from Mr. Sulaiman Ahmed that first a brief introduction from your side would be easier for our audience to understand that who you are and what you are going to talk about, sir. We'll be thankful. Sir, we are ready for your talk.
I'm sorry, I did not hear what you said. You were cut off completely. You said something about introduction, but after that, I lost you.
You may start the talk, sir.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam ajma'in. First, let me thank the organizers of this event, particularly Brother Sulaiman, for putting all the effort to bring my brothers and sisters here today so that we can talk about one of the most important issues that the Muslim Ummah has faced in a long time, which is the issue of Palestine. What I would like to cover in this talk, 5 points. The first is, why did Tufan al-Aqsa take place? Second, what were the choices that the Palestinians were facing right before Tufan al-Aqsa? Third, what are the strategic consequences of Tufan al-Aqsa, not only on the Palestinians themselves? What is the situation of the Ummah and the Tufan?
Recording in progress.
Stand? And last, what is the strategic goal of this conflict? Where points on September 22nd, 2023, normalized yet, that would have ended what is called the Palestinian issue. This was the strategic situation right before Tufan al-Aqsa. What Tufan al-Aqsa did, it disrupted this process that would have incorporated the Zionist state within the region and across the world, particularly the Muslim world, and would have ended what would have been the most important challenge that the Ummah has faced since the fall of the Caliphate. On the other hand, internally, the government of Netanyahu, which took power to control back in the late 2022, early 2023, was ready to start its own political program by annexing the West Bank. If you recall, there were a political process that started back in 1993 called the Oslo process that was supposed, after the PLO, the official representative of the Palestinian people, recognized Israel 78%, that there would have been a Palestinian state on 22%. Israelis had no intention of giving Palestinians any rights. In fact, what they did, they accelerated the settlement policies. There were about 115,000 settlers back in 1993. Today, they exceeded 800,000, and they were on their way to annex what is called Area C. The West Bank was divided into areas A, B, and C, where A, the Palestinians would be living basically in townships and bandustans, and then there will be an Area B, where Israel will retain security control, and Area C, which is about 60% of the West Bank, would retain both administrative and security powers. It also announced that it's going to accelerate the settlement policy within that part of the West Bank, as Smotrich, the current finance minister, And the person who is leading one of the right fascist parties in the Zionist state, he said basically that we're going to make this 1 million and then into 2 million. And this was pretty much what the West Bank was facing as the Israeli settlement policies and the Israeli settlers were armed. Ben Gvir, who is the security minister and who was arming the settlers to the tune of 150,000 piece rifles and arms, also was encouraging this to take place. The West Bank was going to be the next battle in which Israel wanted to annex and marginalize the Palestinians. Meanwhile, the Aqsa Mosque, they were almost first monthly, then weekly, then almost daily incursions in which they were going to impose what they call the place and time division between the Muslims who should have the sole sovereignty over these places and the Jewish side. And they were going to celebrate, they were going to pray, they're going to take part. Eventually, they were going to build their own temple on the same grounds. This was taking place more frequently, starting back in 2023, before Tufan al-Aqsa. There was a real danger and threat to the Al-Aqsa compound, in which they were determined to marginalize again the presence of the Islamic holy sites in the hope that they can build their own Jewish sacred sites on the same holy grounds, even though there's absolutely nothing there for them. And this has been proven back and again, time and again. On the other hand, the situation of the prisoners was going worse. Ben Gvir himself became charged of the Israeli prison system, who started taking out many of the rights that they have gained throughout decades of struggle, the right for education, for visitation, for congregation, for buying certain stuff, and start threatening them, pressuring them. There were over 5,700 at the time before Tufan al-Aqsa, over 2,000 of which were under the administrative detentions with no charges, just keep holding them and arresting more and more. Right now, there have been another at least 10 to 11,000 and tens of other thousands that we don't know what happened to them. They arrest them and possibly execute them before they even are determined whether or not they are detained. In Gaza, there was at least 16 years at the time of crippling siege, a siege that started partially in 2006 and then almost completely in 2007, in which the Palestinians were denied many rights, many items that people around the world were enjoying, that Palestinians in Gaza were under a severe and lack of supplies and many things that other people have. It was a siege that they were hoping to break throughout the years, but no one was able to break it. They staged what is called the Great March of Return in 2017 and 2018, in which hundreds of Palestinians were killed because they were marching peacefully, trying to break that siege. Other people around the world, people who are of conscience, they get ships trying to break the siege, and every time they try it, they were either boarded, turned away, or even killed, as happened in the Mavi Marmara back in the early 2010. The Palestinians, under these conditions, were facing very difficult times and a threat to their existence and a threat to their cause, whether it was the West Bank, Jerusalem, Gaza, the prisoners, or strategically, where they were marginalized as the United States was pushing to get this normalization deal done, in which, in its competition with China, it wanted to reorient itself here by giving the security and economic leadership to Saudi Arabia and Israel in order to focus more on China, in which Israel would have annexed the West Bank, marginalized the Palestinians further, displaced them, or give them the choices, which is that Smotrich has announced, which is my second point that I'm trying to emphasize, that the program of this current government before Tufan al-Aqsa took place was very simple. It was announced by Smotrich, in which he says Palestinians really have three choices. The first choice is that they would have to subject themselves to Israel, that they are subjects, they will have no civil or political rights. They will live there at our discretion, and therefore they should give up any notion that they belong to this. They belong to that they are natives. This is Israeli and Jewish land, and they will have to accept it, recognize it, and if they don't, then the second choice, they could be compensated and they can leave voluntarily. And if they don't leave voluntarily, they may have to leave by force or be killed. These are the three choices facing the Palestinians. And they started their very aggressive policies in which they were trying to impose a reality by which the Palestinians effectively would have to make a choice between these three options. And of course, the Palestinians, after over a century of struggle, would never accept such fate, even though these right-wing fascist Nazis type Jewish extremists would have you believe that this was a fait accompli, that this is going to be the reality after they started their very aggressive policies of settling the land. Meanwhile, the whole world was just turning again a blind eye to what was happening inside the occupied territories, including all these things that I have mentioned. Now, Tufan al-Aqsa came with these circumstances taking place. It was inevitable for the Palestinians to fight and to say that this is not going to happen. We will continue our struggle that has started back at the start of the Zionist movement, back in the late 19th century, early 20th century, where the number of Jews in Palestine did not exceed 25,000. But after the British mandate, when the British took over Palestine in 1917 and 1918, and they were able to stay there for about 30 years, and they made it possible for the Zionists to immigrate illegally to Palestine and establish their own militias, and therefore they can aggressively and militarily take over the land in 1948. That number grew to 650,000. And even with 650,000, and after years of British colonization and British grants and all kinds of aggressive tactics, they did not own more than 6.5% of the territories of the land. And yet they were able, through war, through aggression, through violence, to take over 78% of the land using ethnic cleansing and using genocide. It wasn't as photographed and as wide open as we see it today with the technology that we have before our own eyes. Yet they were able to get and control 78%, displace over 2/3 of the Palestinians from their land, and take over and build a state called the State of Israel. And with that, they were able to continue their aggressive policies and take over the whole of Palestine back in 1967. And this is not a session about the history, but it's very important to recall that the Palestinians, throughout the struggle, never gave up. And they are always yearning to the point where they can regain back their freedom and regain back their rights, particularly when it comes to rights that are not only personal, but there is the Ummah rights in Al-Aqsa compound in Jerusalem. Tufan al-Aqsa came with this background, and we could see that with the entrenched Zionist presence in Palestine, they thought that they are at the cusp of ending this conflict, that they can begin actually celebrating that the whole of Palestine now will be theirs. They will be able to do whatever they want, and they could settle as much as they want, while the Palestinians are impotent. They were able to control the whole region. Most of the regimes in this part of the world have been under either their control or being US clients, American clients, by which they dare not to challenge the Zionist presence and the Zionist regime. Yet, Tufan al-Aqsa took place, a daring operation in which the Palestinians have shown that they are capable at least of bringing this presence, this Zionist presence, the arrogant presence, into a situation where they could be hit hard, where they could lose actually this image of being the invincible army, of being the army that never loses, that is in control, and that could do whatever it wants without any challenge. I want to go over very briefly some of the strategic consequences of what happened. Tufan al-Aqsa brought this image on the security and intelligence to reality, that despite this history of Israeli being in control not only of the Palestinians and their fate, as well as the whole region, those who carried out Tufan al-Aqsa were able to strategically deceive this apparatus that was controlling actually every segment and every moment of Palestinian lives, was able to bloody it and to win and defeat it on Tufan al-Aqsa on October 7th, 2023. It was very clear that this daring attack was targeting military and intelligence bases, and they were able to defeat them on that day. There was a massive intelligence and security failure on that day, even though they pride themselves as being the most important and most efficient intelligence services in the world. On the military front, they were also hit back. The military doctrine of Israel depends on many factors in many elements. Perhaps the 6 elements that this doctrine depends on, all of them were being impacted. They were being undermined. The first of which is preemptive strikes. Israel, throughout its history, has developed a military doctrine in order to ensure that they will always win over their enemies. And some of these doctrines that have been developed since the foundation of the state, as we could see now, have been undermined. The first was preemptive strikes. Israel always wanted to hit first and to hit in enemy's territory. This time around, they were hit first, even though in 1973, they were also surprised by an Egyptian-Syrian attack, but that was also in Egyptian and Syrian territory. This time around, they were also surprised in a preemptive strike, and it was on their own bases, in their own towns and settlements. The second element of that doctrine is what is referred to as early warning system, in which Israel could actually develop a warning system that it could alert it to any pending attack. This time around, this early warning system failed miserably, as the attack on Tufan al-Aqsa was able actually to penetrate deep into their own bases and communities. The third is effective deterrence. Israel was always priding itself that it can deter its enemies by making sure that they will never dare to attack. But this time around, we find not only has the resistance not been deterred, but attacked first and has been standing and has been responding to the attacks by Israel on the Palestinians throughout more than a year. But also we could see other forces. Yes, what Israel is capable of doing is destroying and killing. Israel does not fight. This is not a fight. This is not a military fight where people are fighting each other. What we have seen and witnessed throughout the year is that what Israel is capable of doing is targeting civilians, killing civilians, women and children mostly. Over 70% of the victims are women and children, even though the official number is about 55,000 killed. The true number is probably 4 times that. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of people who have been injured. We're talking about the total destruction of civilian life in Gaza, including hospitals and clinics and mosques and churches and markets and over 70% of the residents. We're talking about universities and schools and shelters. Everything that resembles civil life, that's Israel, what it's capable of doing. It does not fight. What Israel is doing is to try to solve a problem that hasn't been able to solve for a long time. It calls itself a democracy. Far from it, Israel is a genocidal state that is intent on having one group, the Jewish race, dominant, what they consider as a Jewish race. They try to redefine Judaism from it being a faith into a race, to have dominance of Jewish race over the Palestinians and the Arabs and the natives. That's what they are doing. And with that, they use religion in order to force this issue to the point where the Palestinians would have no choice but to leave because they have a demographic problem, calling themselves democracy. At the same time, over half of the population in historical Palestine have zero rights, have no rights. That is nothing but apartheid. And eventually, over time, the world will not stand for that. So what they're trying to do is to take opportunity of this situation and try to ethnically cleanse the Palestinians using genocidal tools, genocidal policies, and that's what we have seen throughout this conflict. And the deterrence, yet we could see that they were unable to deter even Ansarullah in Yemen or the Lebanon or even Iran. We saw the fourth element is strong defense. Israel always said that it has a strong defense, that its enemies will not dare to respond or attack. But we saw that when Iran, even though it was telegraphed, Iran said exactly that's what it's going to hit. They gave them even the targets. They needed the United States, France, Britain, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Egypt, and other powers to help them in trying to deter the missiles and the drones of Iran. And they continue to rely on the U.S. The U.S. is not simply a broker. It's not a bystander. It's part and parcel and complicit in this genocide. It's a partner of the Israeli genocidal and war machine. The fifth element of this doctrine is quick resolution. Israel always says that it needs to fight fast, end the war as soon as it could, so that there will not be any kind of prolonging war, because even though it's a military society, most of its military is on reserves. It needs to preserve the economy and the society, and therefore it won these wars very quickly. That would happen in 1967. It was able to occupy 2.5 times the territory of Palestine in 6 days. Yet here we have passed a 1-year mark, and they are unable to have any kind of resolution or to fulfill any of their objectives, which is basically to annihilate the resistance, end the resistance, whether in the south or the north, return their communities that have to be evacuated, or end the rule of Hamas in Gaza, or even ethnically cleansed Palestinians. None of these declared and undeclared objectives was Israel able to achieve. And therefore, the quick resolution doctrine also has not been working. And the last one is escalation dominance. And that's what we have seen in the past few weeks in them trying to use all kinds of terror tactics, all kinds of escalation, because they can't resolve anything. So they always escape forward by trying to impose even harsher realities on the Palestinians and the Lebanese and the people of the area, hoping that this overwhelming escalation and killing and destruction would force people to surrender. And yet we have seen how this has brought the opposite impact, and that their enemies are more determined than ever to meet that challenge with their own challenge. So even the military doctrine, the elements of the military doctrine have been somehow undermined, even though it hasn't been totally defeated, but it certainly has been undermined. The other element of this military doctrine is to have what is called a barrier, a territorial or land barrier between the borders of the state, of the Zionist state, of the Zionist regime, and their enemies. That's what they're trying to do in northern Gaza. That's what they're trying to do in southern Lebanon. That's why they went through Camp David, to have the whole of Sinai as a barrier between them and Egypt, since Egypt could actually pose a threat. That threat was somehow removed after the Camp David Accords of 1978 and the Peace Treaty of 1979. Same thing happened with Jordan. And they have done all this so that they can actually annex the West Bank and end the Palestinian issue. Therefore, in the future, they could go and try to reclaim some of these lands as they believe it exists in their Bible, as some of these extremists have been saying now openly. Another strategic consequence is the undermining of the psychology of that society. We're talking about a very sick society, a society that thinks of itself as the chosen people, and therefore they really have no respect and no regard whatsoever to any other people, even the people of the West. They think themselves above everyone else. They are above the law, and they can do as they choose. And therefore, whoever is not from them, is not a member of that tribe, they would just have to adhere to their dictates. What happened in October, in the Tufan al-Aqsa, an October attack, is that this image has been shattered. This image has been shaken to the core, that they saw that their noses could actually be bloodied, and that their belief in their army and the force has been shaken. That's why the backlash has been not only to retaliate against the Palestinians, but to use all this brutality so that they can feel somehow that they are invincible and victorious, trying to restore this image. On the economic side, we saw that how this society, if it wasn't for Western aid and Western support, particularly American, that economy would have collapsed long time ago. Thousands of companies had declared bankruptcy. Hundreds of thousands of people have emigrated, particularly those with advanced education and companies. They were living in the state not just because they believed in the Zionist myth, but also because it afforded them good opportunity to have a good life, as well as a good way of developing economically, particularly in advanced technology. That economic boom has been undermined. The growth has been in the negative, and certainly if much of the investment that they were promised has evaporated. On the propaganda side, even though Zionist Hasbara has been ruling the media for a long time, we saw that there has been important cracks in that image, in that narrative that they have been trying to advance throughout the decades, that people no longer believe in the Zionist myth, that there are some serious media outlets, particularly the alternative media, who have the Zionist narrative has been punctured, has been undermined, that no longer people believe in that this is a land for people, a land without a people, for people without a land, that there are natives who have lived there for thousands of years, and that they yearn for their freedom and to restore their land and their rights. That there are millions of refugees who have been waiting to go back to their lands, that there is an apartheid regime living there trying to impose these harsh realities in order to displace and dispossess the Palestinians, that the image that they have heard in 1948 is a myth, is not true, that Israel was built on violence and built in dispossession and built on trying to impose a racist, supremacist state over the natives, if they are unable to dispossess them and displace them and exile them as they did in 1948. This Zionist narrative has been critically undermined, and there are now millions of people who are seeing what Israel stands for, what Israel actually is, what Zionism represents, and they have been revolting against it and taking strong stand, including many Jews around the world. On the legal side, we've seen that Israel, for the first time, had to stand in front of the International Court of Justice as an accused regime that is using genocide to advance its objectives. It's unable to actually defend against this. The evidence is overwhelming. Unfortunately, it was only South Africa that was brave enough to bring about these charges because of its history against apartheid. Luckily, other regimes have joined, and I hope you can encourage Pakistan also to be part of the countries that need to advance this, that Israel has no legitimacy when it comes to what tactics they have been using against the natives, against the people of the land. And therefore, on the legal side, we've seen also that the prime minister and his war minister have been requested to be arrested as war criminals. And the international system is not allowing this to take place, even though we've seen that when it came to Russia and Ukraine, the whole system acted within a few weeks. But when it comes to Palestine, because of the Zionist influence and their supporters around the world, the wheels of justice are very, very slow when it comes to the Palestinians. We saw internally also that there's a huge division, even though they all come together when it comes to killing Palestinians, displacing Palestinians, dispossessing Palestinians and Lebanese. They all unite in that because they all come from the same cloth, the cloth of Zionism, where they do not believe that anyone else have the right to exist in this land except their own ilk. But we saw also that within them that they are there's much division, that there was reverse immigration of hundreds of thousands of people and massive displacement, both from the north and the south. That Netanyahu is not somebody that there is a great consensus on, that he is considered not only as a war criminal worldwide, but also as a corrupt criminal internally. And also, I talked about earlier the strategic situation where it was dealt a blow. We don't know if it is a fatal blow or not because of Tufan al-Aqsa, since they were preparing to be crowned as the kingmakers and the people and the regime in control of this region that will preserve and protect the interests of the United States, that it would be considered by much of the region here as being the protector, the security protector of this region, that all doors would be open to it, and that they will be able to isolate those who do not accept this reality, whether it was Iran or the so-called axis of resistance. But we saw today that this narrative, this image has been completely undermined, if not totally shattered. We saw also how the whole world today is considering Palestine as being the issue that represents the human yearning towards freedom, towards justice, towards genuine peace, towards the rebalancing of this world against exploitation, excessive and unrestrained capitalism. All the things that people suffer from are represented today in the Palestinian issue. We saw millions of people around the world demonstrating, protesting, taking strong stands, people of conscience, freedom-seeking, justice-seeking people have come together. This is the only issue. Palestine is the only issue that is capable of mobilizing the whole globe. There is no other issue that can actually come close to that. People from every corner of the world, every capital of the world were mobilizing and standing up and taking strong issues against these systems of oppression, systems of injustice, systems that would like to keep the status quo, those who peril in merchants of death, of war machines and arms industry and so forth, to keep the people down. They support Zionism and support Israeli atrocities, and those who would like to see a more peaceful, more just, and free world are on the side of the Palestinians. This is very important because it gives Palestine to become a global issue. It is no longer an issue about the suffering of the Palestinian people. It's about the struggle towards the freedom of the whole world, of the whole globe, against those systems that will try to keep it under control, under hegemony, whether it's imperialism, capitalism, multinational corporations, or Zionist racist structures. That brings me to the next point, which is the Ummah and the Tufan. We need to look at Palestine not simply as a humanitarian case. I tell people Palestine is the central issue of the Muslim Ummah for a very important reason. And that reason is not because Palestine is a sacred territory, that it has religious significance because of Al-Isra and Al-Mi'raj, or because the Prophet prayed there with the prophets on that night, or even because of the suffering and the amount of suffering of the Palestinian people, even though that suffering is immense, and we have seen it, how the Palestinians, their suffering has been tremendous. The valor, the steadfastness, the resilience, their insistence and persistence to stay on their land despite all this suffering is certainly commendable and unmatched in recent history. But that's not what makes Palestine central. Other struggles, other communities also have suffered. We've seen it in Afghanistan. You have seen it in Afghanistan. You've seen it in Bosnia. You have seen it in Iraq, in Libya, in Syria, in Yemen, in Somalia, in Sudan, in other places. We have seen it throughout the world where people suffer and they struggle. What makes Palestine unique, though, is the nature of the enemy, because here, what Israel wants is to keep this Ummah and to keep this region down, because it thinks that it cannot survive if there is any kind of powerful regime or a powerful state, or even a revived Ummah in this part. It will be a direct challenge to it. So it is part of its long-term and short-term strategy to make sure that there will be no project in this part. There will be no attempt of uniting the people here, of having a civilizational quest or revival, or even economic prosperity, or any kind of scientific advancement. That's why you see they lash left and right at any of these. And one of the best examples is what happened in the so-called Arab Spring, which turned into a winter very quickly, because Israel was working day and night with other counter-revolutionary governments who were afraid that the people would finally be liberated and will have freedom and agency and sovereignty. And therefore, they were working day and night with great powers, such as the United States, to make sure that this Arab Spring will never come to fruition, even though much of the powers did not challenge them directly. In fact, a regime that came after that Arab Spring in Tunisia actually gave all the concessions and all the guarantees, and even though they were not allowed to continue. In other words, Israel is not only a challenge, but is a threat to the future of the Ummah in this part. They will never allow us to come united. They will never allow us to try our own civilizational model. They will always try to penetrate our communities, our societies, to make sure that we will stay weak. Whether you are in Pakistan, which they were trying for a long time. I was in the States at the time to undermine the nuclear program in Pakistan. They tried every trick under the sun to make sure that that program will never advance. And of course, they failed, but it has to be under certain conditions and only towards the threat from India. It should never be allowed to threaten the Zionist states. In other words, if Israel, which has hundreds of nuclear weapons, would eventually use it or threaten other powers in the region to use it so that it can maintain its hegemony over this. Pakistan could never extend its nuclear cover to other Muslim countries and to other countries in the region to make sure it can pacify and neutralize the Zionist nuclear threat. So that was the compromise that they tried to do. And why is that the case? Because they want to isolate Pakistan from being part of the Muslim Ummah, and they want to make sure that they can maintain the hegemony and control of Israel over the entire region and over the entire Muslim world. We saw how they killed scientists from every part of the Muslim world, from Iranians to Egyptians to Moroccans to Syrians to even Iraqis, and that would be a threat to the Zionist states. And therefore, they will never allow this part, this region, this Ummah, to advance in any endeavor, whether it's scientific, military, economic, whatever, political, because they think this is a threat. Their plan for the region is not only to have the Arab world into 22 countries. Actually, there is a plan that was written back in 1982 in which it was promoting dividing it even further along ethnic and sectarian lines to make them into 43 states, because this is how it can maintain its hegemony. This is how it can maintain its control. This is how it can be able to dictate to all the regimes and to all the people of the area what it wanted, which is basically a complete hegemony. And it can advance its plans for further territorial gains once it's able to bring about a system in which it can be in total control, of course, with the help and support and aid and protection of the United States. So this is why Palestine is a central issue, or must be a central issue for the Muslim Ummah. If we think that we can have a revival project, if we think we can advance its civilizational model, we will be mistaken, because this entity, with its roots in the West and with this hatred and this racism that is embedded in this regime, that is embedded in this ideology, that is part and parcel of the West's quest towards control of the resources and of the whole future of the Muslim Ummah, then we need to know what it is our strategic goal. And that back in November 2020, after 5 weeks of Tufan al-Aqsa, 57 Muslim countries came about and met in Saudi Arabia, trying to figure out what we're going to do. What are we going to do about these massacres? And they were only 5 weeks old. We were talking about, at the time, perhaps 10, 15,000 Palestinians were killed. And yet the Muslim countries were unable to come with any kind of a concrete proposal or a concrete resolution to face up this challenge. The best they could do was simply to say that we will bring about, or we will deliver aid and assistance to the Palestinians who were under complete siege by the Israelis. And yet the hundreds of thousands of tons that were just on the border to do anything for our brethren, not only in Palestine, but throughout, but particularly in Palestine, as we are witnessing now for over a year, massacre after massacre after massacre, 70% of which are women and children, and destruction of our holy places and of a whole in the center of the Muslim Ummah, and yet we are incapable of doing anything. So we need to identify our strategic goal in this conflict. And our strategic control should be that we cannot revive, we cannot advance the Ummah's situation to have a revival project, to have any kind of civilizational model that we can present before we gain our own sovereignty, before we gain our own free independence. And therefore, we need to identify Zionism as being the greatest threat. And our strategic goal should be to dismantle the Zionist regime. I'm not talking about killing anyone or deporting anybody. We have to understand that this issue started with the racism of Europe against its own Jewish communities, in which Zionism thought that its only way to resolve this is by establishing their own nation state, but that was at the expense of Palestinians. And we say, if you're unable to find safety and protection in Europe because of its racism, you're welcome to come from Tanja to Jakarta, but as immigrants who are seeking refuge not as sovereign countries who are trying to dictate and that Jews have the right to settle in Palestine as a sovereign country, as a Jewish state. Anybody who believes in that, even on 1 inch of Palestine, is a Zionist. And that could be a Jew, could be a Christian, could be a Muslim, could be a Hindu, could be a Buddhist, could be non-religious, atheist. And therefore, our strategic goal is to not allow this to take place. Our strategic goal is to dismantle these Zionist structures, because Zionism is a settler, colonial, aggressive, supremacist, racist regime, and we cannot allow that to exist in the midst of the Muslim countries. Now, how do we do this? And I'm going to end on this note. How we do this? We need to identify its sources of strength and weaknesses. I have identified, and I don't have time to go over it, that this is Zionism, or the Zionist regime is like a house that is built on 12 pillars, 12 columns, 12 sources of power. And these are powers that you can see this is not something that the Palestinians alone can dismantle or can impact. And therefore, the formula is very simple. To dismantle the Zionist regime, it cannot be done without the Palestinians, but it cannot be done with the Palestinians alone. Every single person in the world, particularly across the Muslim world, and also where Zionism is strong, must be involved in this process. This process involves the building of a global movement that will have 2 tasks. One is to support the steadfastness and resilience and presence and existence and of the Palestinians on their own land, so that they cannot leave, because if they leave, the situation will be very difficult. And that's what's happening today in Palestine. The other is to engage and confront the Zionist threat, the Zionist structures throughout the world, politically, diplomatically, economically, commercially, socially, academically, culturally, in the media, legally, humanitarian, sports, entertainment, every single part, they must be confronted. And that puts the struggle in the right focus. That means we need to build these movements across the world. We need to see this world as it's supposed to be, which is the struggle of those who are on the side of justice and freedom and independence and self-determination against those who would like to exploit the other people and keep them under hegemonic control. Let me stop here and open it for any questions and answers. Thank you very much.